What if I told you that some promises take decades to fulfill, not because I have forgotten them, but because I am preparing the perfect moment for their fulfillment? Many people lose hope when answers take longer than expected. They assume silence means abandonment. They assume delay means denial. But Genesis chapter 21 reveals one of the greatest truths in all of Scripture. When I make a promise, I keep it. Not early, not late, exactly on time. And before this chapter ends, a miracle child will be born. A mother will weep in the wilderness. A hidden well will save a life, and the world will witness that my faithfulness never fails. For years, Abraham and Sarah waited. The promise had been spoken repeatedly. The covenant had been established. The stars had testified to their future. Yet the child had never come. Year after year passed. Their bodies grew older. The promise seemed increasingly impossible. But then the appointed time arrived. The moment I had declared long before finally came. Sarah conceived, exactly as I had promised, not according to human ability, not according to natural expectation, but according to my word. Pause for a moment and imagine the joy that filled Abraham's tent. The man who once stood beneath the stars, wondering if the promise would ever come, was now holding the fulfillment in his arms. Sarah, who had once laughed in disbelief, was now laughing with joy. The impossible had become reality. The promised son was born, and Abraham named him Isaac. The name itself means laughter. What began with uncertainty ended in celebration. What began with questions ended in fulfillment. What began with waiting ended with joy. Abraham was 100 years old. Sarah was 90. Every human limitation had been overcome by my power. Sarah herself declared the wonder of the moment. I have made her laugh, and everyone who hears this story will laugh with her. Think about that. For years, people may have laughed at the promise. Now they would laugh at the miracle. The same God who created the universe had fulfilled his word exactly as he said he would. The child grew. The household rejoiced. And when Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great celebration. It should have been a perfect moment, a chapter of pure joy, but another story was unfolding beneath the surface. Sarah noticed Ishmael, the son born through Hagar, and she saw him mocking Isaac. Tension that had existed for years now came into the open. The conflict between the child of promise and the child born through human effort could no longer be ignored. Sarah approached Abraham with a difficult request. Send Hagar away. Send Ishmael away. The words pierced Abraham's heart. Why? Because Ishmael was his son. Abraham loved him. He cared for him. The request brought deep sorrow. This was not merely a family disagreement. It was one of the most painful moments in Abraham's life. Yet I spoke to Abraham, do not be distressed. Listen to Sarah, for the covenant promise would continue through Isaac. The promised line would proceed through the son I had chosen. But notice something important. I did not abandon Ishmael. I did not reject him. I reminded Abraham of something I had already promised. I would make Ishmael into a great nation, because he too was Abraham's son. This chapter is not a story of rejection. It is a story of different purposes. Isaac would carry the covenant. Ishmael would receive blessing. Both remained under my care. The next morning, Abraham obeyed. With a heavy heart, he prepared bread and water. He entrusted Hagar and Ishmael to my care. Then they departed into the wilderness of Beersheba. Imagine that journey, a mother and her son walking through a harsh desert, the sun beating down, the water supply shrinking, every step carrying uncertainty. Eventually, the water was gone, the bottle was empty, hope seemed to disappear. Hagar placed Ishmael beneath a shrub. She could no longer bear the thought of watching him die. She moved away and began to weep. This is one of the most emotional moments in Genesis. A mother who felt helpless, a son who appeared doomed, a future that seemed lost. But what Hagar could not see was that I was already there. Notice the beautiful words of Scripture. I heard the voice of the boy, not because his cries were louder than others, not because he was more important than others, but because I hear. I always hear. I called out from heaven, "Fear not." The words that have comforted generations began once again. Fear not. I had not abandoned them. I had not forgotten them. I had not overlooked their suffering. I reaffirmed the promise. Ishmael would become a great nation. Then something remarkable happened. I opened Hagar's eyes, and suddenly she saw what had been there all along, a well of water. Think about that. The provision already existed. The answer was already nearby. The solution was already present. She simply could not see it. How often is that true in life? People become overwhelmed by fear, consumed by circumstances, focused on problems, and fail to notice that my provision is closer than they realize. The well refreshed them, life returned, hope returned. The future continued. Ishmael grew strong. He became an archer. He lived in the wilderness. And my promise over his life continued to unfold. Years later, his descendants would become a great nation, exactly as I had declared. The chapter then shifts to another important moment. Abimelech returned, the same king who had once encountered me in a dream. This time he arrived with a different purpose. He recognized something undeniable. God is with you in everything you do. What a testimony. Even those outside Abraham's covenant could see my favor upon his life. Abimelech sought peace. A covenant was established. Disputes concerning a well were resolved, and the place became known as Beersheba, the well of the oath, a place where promises were confirmed, relationships were strengthened, and peace was established. Finally, Abraham planted a grove there, and he called upon my name, the everlasting God. What a fitting conclusion, because throughout this chapter, my everlasting nature had been displayed. I remained faithful across decades. I fulfilled promises that seemed impossible. I cared for both Isaac and Ishmael. I provided water in the wilderness. I preserved covenant relationships, and I demonstrated once again that my purposes endure forever. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of Genesis chapter 21. My promises may require patience, but they never fail. Sarah laughed with joy because what seemed impossible became reality. Hagar found hope because what seemed lost was restored. Abraham found peace because what I had spoken finally came to pass. The same God who fulfilled his promise to Abraham remains faithful today. The same God who provided water in the wilderness still provides. The same God who hears the cries of the forgotten still hears. And the same God who kept his covenant then continues to keep his promises now. If this story has deepened your understanding of Scripture, subscribe to Primordial Lore and continue exploring the greatest stories ever told. And now, continue to the next chapter, where Abraham faces the greatest test of faith in all his life. A mountain becomes the stage for unimaginable obedience, and a sacrifice changes biblical history forever.